Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 2010 virtual user group meeting that we affectionately call the water cooler. Today we are talking about one program that people rarely, if ever, go into, and that's why we have a lot of people attending today, because they don't go in there and I guess they want to find out what's going on in there. It is system configuration. It's where all sorts of things get set up. Usually those things are set up by us. Sometimes they're not. And there are things that you can do in there that you might want to know about, because a lot of times people do the wrong thing in there and get things messed up. So we're going to talk about users and access profiles and groups and firm information and certain utilities that are available to you. But before we do that, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and I'm going to show you this box, which replicates one that you probably have over on the right-hand side of your screen. There is a smaller box that juts off to the left with a couple icons on it. The one at the top looks like arrows that point to the right. And if you click on that button, it will take this bigger box and slide it right out of the way. Once you click on it and slide this bigger box right out of the way, this icon will change into one that looks like arrows pointing to the left. And when you click on the icon when it looks like arrows pointing to the left, it will slide this big box back into view. Why would you want to do that? Because you have a question and you're shy. If you have a question and you're shy, you come here to the questions section, type your question right here. We will see it, and at a certain point we will answer it. If you have a question and you're not shy, all you need to do is click on this button here that looks kind of like a hand with something that looks kind of like an arrow in front of it, and that means, you guessed it, raising your hand. Once we see that people have raised their hands, we will stop, allow them to ask their question by unmuting them, and then we will answer the question, make sure that we got it answered to their satisfaction, and then we will mute them so that they can continue eating their Doritos or Fritos or whatever else they're eating for lunch. So with that said, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to go look at system configuration. Now, there are 4 icons along the top that control virtually everything that you can do within here. And so we're going to start with the first one, which if you hover over it, you will see is access profiles. Now, you may go into access profiles and find that you don't have any. I have some that are set up in my sample system, but if you haven't set any up and we haven't set any up and nobody else has set any up, then you probably don't have any. Now, there is a master access profile that doesn't even show up in this list. It's called manager. And if you don't have any access profiles, everybody is a manager. But what that means is that if you don't have any access profiles, everybody can do anything. And that may or may not be a good situation depending on your firm, how big it is, what kind of people you have doing what kinds of things. We won't distinguish between lawyers, but just between you and me, we like to keep lawyers out of certain parts of the billing and accounting software simply because they have a tendency to press buttons they shouldn't. This is where you can control that. If we were, for instance, to create an access profile called lawyers or attorneys, we could then, and I won't do it, I'll just pull this one up, we could then go to each of these tabs, and these represent the individual programs. So if you don't have general ledger and trust accounting and accounts payable, these tabs will simply be grayed out. You can go to each of the tabs and identify down almost to a menu item by menu item level, and sometimes even beyond that, what this group of people can and cannot do. Now, I'll stop right here and say that once you've created access profiles, when you go to set up users, which we'll look at in a minute, one of the things you do is assign them to an access profile. So once you've set up the different types or levels of access that people should be allowed, you then assign the individual people to specific access profiles. So if this were, for instance, were the attorney's access profile, we might, for fees, costs, and payments, we might want them to be able to add fees and browse fees and maybe even change fees, but perhaps we don't want them to delete fees. Once they're in, they have, if they want to delete it, they have to come to the billing department and have them deleted. Maybe we don't even want them to change them. So by going to the fee, cost, and payment transactions section, I then see all the fee, cost, and payment transaction related things or tasks that can be performed, and I get to choose on an item-by-item basis what people can do. And as you can see, it's not just do they have access to fees, but it's can they browse them, or can they add them, or can they change them, or can they delete them. And you'll find this browse, add, change, delete level of control in a lot of different things. And what that means is you can, as I've given you the example here, you can say, well, yeah, the attorneys can look at fees, they can add them, but they can't change them or delete them. If they decide they made a mistake, they need to come to billing and request that. Or what's much more common, I guess, is that they are allowed to change them, but they can't delete them. It just keeps things from happening that shouldn't happen. And each of these individual groups of tasks will open up another set of items down here that you can control with a yes or a no. You can also, for the selected functions, for instance, if I hold down Control and select these functions, you can allow or disallow. You can say, for all the functions within billing, we want to allow or disallow, or for the entire system, we want to allow or disallow. So you can kind of say, well, if we want to create an access profile that has very limited access, you might start by disallowing everything and then coming in and turning on only the things that you want. Or you might take all the functions within a certain group and disallow them and then turn on only certain things. So item by item, or group by group, program by program, you can disallow or allow the entire group of functions within that program and then open them up, or you can allow them all and then close them up one by one, whatever is more appropriate. If you're creating an access profile that has a lot of access, you want to start by allowing them all and then narrowing down the ones you don't want. If you're creating a very limited access profile, you want to start by disallowing everything and then opening up from there. We do also have on this tab the ability to access these functions that we're talking about right now within system configuration. So in addition to the 5 programs that you could have, you also will always have this system activity tab where you can look at group configuration, user configuration, and block those things also. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this up. I'm going to not save because I don't want to mess up my sample data. I'm going to take us into users, and I'm going to turn us over to Mary Jo, who's going to talk about users.
Okay. When you get into the user tab, which looks like the little driver's license ID up here, you can create new users, or you can also change passwords and things like that in here. So if you're brand new and you're just setting up your system, a lot of times we'll come in here and set up your users for you. We'll find out how you want to set those up, whether you want to use first initial, last name, just your initials. If you're a small firm, sometimes we just use your first names for everybody. And you assign them a user ID, and we usually recommend that you have that be something that's consistent throughout the firm, so it makes it easy if everybody is always first initial, last name, or last name, first initial, or initials. It just makes it easy for everybody when you come in to make changes or you want to access that user. You come in, go ahead and you can set up the user ID, the initials. You can type the full name here under the username. You can assign a password and confirm the password here. Then you can also put in your email address. And I'm going to talk about over here, you've got this thing called Use Text Color. And what that refers to is the calendar in PracticeMaster. If you've got several users and you want to view a calendar, all the users show up on one calendar. And we do have a feature in Calendar where you can put their initials in front. But if you're out front as a receptionist, or you're a secretary that has, or a legal assistant that has several different attorneys that you're looking for, and you're looking at that calendar every day, sometimes it's a little bit easier to see each user and it's their own color. So this is where you actually can come in and assign a user color, or a text color to each user. And if I do the drop-down, Paul, I don't have control. Can you give me some? Hold on one second. I have limited control here. What you can do is, if they don't have, got it? Okay, there we go. If they don't have the color that you're looking for here, you can come in and do other, and you can actually go to the whole rainbow grid here and add custom colors to give everybody their own color. So you're not limited to just the basic colors here. So you can come in and make somebody red or blue or green or whatever you want there, assign their color, and that's the color that they will be on the calendar. And there is a setting over in Calendar that you can change and say that you want to see the calendar items by user text color, and then that's how that will show up. And so that is where you do that, is here in System Configuration. The other thing that I'm going to talk about is calendar rights. A lot of times I will get calls from clients and so-and-so is a brand new to the firm, and they added them in here as a user, but they can't see their attorney's calendar or, certain employees' calendars. Well, this is where you actually assign it. When you set up a user, you go ahead and you click on the calendar rights, and you can see right here I've got a list of all these sample users here, and they have no rights at all to each other's calendars. There's no check marks over here. So I can give them rights and say that Kathleen has the right to edit the public calendar. I'm sorry, we're in Paul Purdue's calendar, so he's allowed to edit the public calendar for Kathleen. He's able to browse private, and he's able to edit private. Now, some people want to keep their private items private. They don't want anybody to browse or see their private calendar items. You would just leave those unchecked, and they can just go ahead and edit the public then. So any public entries that they put out there, they'd be able to change. And you can come through here, and you can do this for everybody, that they have access to see their calendar. And then you just go ahead and say OK, and then that person, whoever user you are in, will be able to have rights and access to these calendars. Paul, do you want to take it from there and talk about Outlook integration?
Sure. Okay, now down here we set up our Outlook integration, and we're not really going to talk too much about the actual ins and outs of Outlook integration, but PracticeMaster can take contacts and calendar items and tasks and clients and push them out to Outlook and pull them back in from Outlook. It can be set to automatically push out. Currently, you need to run a synchronization to pull them back in if there are any changes made out in Outlook. But this is where you configure that. And basically, you simply check for each user that you want to integrate with Outlook, which if you're doing it usually for all users. You can set up the configuration options within here. And for some reason, that's not working, but that's all right because I'm not really going to go into the details of how the integration works. But this is where you set up one-way versus two-way and contacts versus calendar. You have the tabs for contacts and calendar, and whether you have events and tasks and things like that. So that configuration, once you decide you're going to integrate with Outlook, this is where you come to set it up. You turn it on here. You configure your various options by clicking this button here and going into the submenu that comes up and setting these options. You do have one-way, two-way, and disabled, so you may have it set not to pass contacts to Outlook, but to do two-way synchronization between Outlook and back for your calendar items. And you can tell it whether to do events and tasks or both. And then some other things that I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail on, but this is where you set that up. Now, if you're using Exchange, which is a server-based solution that ties all your different Outlook users together within your firm, and if you have it, you probably know what that means already, then this drop-down will be automatically populated once you check this box with all the users on your Exchange server, and you simply drop it down and select the appropriate user. We don't use Exchange here, so I don't have a drop-down that's showing those users. But basically, to set up Outlook configuration, you pull up each individual user, turn it on, configure based on what you've decided the firm configuration is going to be for Outlook for contacts and events and tasks. And then if you're using Exchange, you set up the Exchange or link it to the Exchange user here. So you've got your user in system configuration, and this is how you tie that user to the Exchange user in Microsoft Office Exchange. Okay, Mary Jo is going to talk about profile groups and timekeepers.
Okay, Paul talked about how to set up your profile groups over here for your access for each user, and this is where you actually assign it to each user. So the manager, when you come in and you set up a brand new user, you will have all of the access profiles listed here, but nothing will be checked. So you have to manually tell it what rights does this user have to the system by choosing a profile group. So you can come in and make that person a manager, which means that they have rights to everything. And you'll notice when I check that box, the assigned Tabs3 PracticeMaster Timekeeper box is not available. It's grayed out because that means that a manager has rights to all timekeepers, all unlimited access to the whole system. So by unchecking it and saying that this particular user has billing rights, whatever I chose over there to be their profile group limitations that's what's going to show up here. So then I can assign specific timekeepers for this particular user. Maybe for the billing department, and this is a bad example probably, but if you had the attorney group that we talked about, or maybe you've got a staff, or you have your legal assistants, those might be the names of your groups. They might have rights to certain timekeepers. Legal assistants is a great example because maybe they're only working for 3 different attorneys, and that's the only attorney's information that they need to see. I could actually come in here and assign timekeepers and say, okay, Paul Perdue has rights to see Michael Larson, Robert Burns, and Cheryl Bradley. And those are the 3 timekeepers that they're allowed to have access to. And they will be limited to just those 3. If they try to go into a client for Paula Ann Martin, it'll be disallowed. So be careful when you come in here and you start assigning. Just know that they won't have rights to anybody else. And if they do have rights to everyone, you just leave this unchecked. You're just not assigning them anything. That means that they have rights to all timekeepers. So that is where you do that. You must assign a profile, because if you don't, when they go to sign in, they won't be able to get in. It will deny them and say that they don't have rights to log in because you just forgot to give them an access profile. So no matter what it is, you have to give them something and save it, and then that will keep that for that user. Paul?
I'm going to make one clarification. You said that it would limit their access to clients for that timekeeper. That's not true. Client is limited through Secure Client. It will limit them to seeing time for that timekeeper. So if Paula Brady or Paula whoever is the primary timekeeper for John Doe, you can still enter time for John Doe and see the time that you've entered or see the time you have access to, but you can't see the time that's entered for Paula Brady. You're merely limiting the access to the time, not to the clients. Clients is done for Secure Clients.
Yep, you're right.
I'm always right. What am I talking about? Login active and inactive. Login user is someone who can log into the system. A lot of times we see people, or they'll call us and they'll want us to do this, who want to delete a user. Paul Perdue is gone. We want to get him out of our system. Well, no, you don't, because Paul Perdue may have made a lot of case notes. He may have tagged emails to clients. He may have done a lot of things within the system that if we take him out of the system, we lose that association between him and whatever it is that he did. For instance, every time you enter time, even if you're entering time for somebody else, you are tagged as the user that entered that time. Every time you create a note or tag an email to a case, you are tagged as the user that did that. You may have tasks and events that were in the calendar from when you were here or when Paul Perdue was here, and if we take out the login, if we just delete this user, then that association between Paul Perdue and all those items is broken, and it creates data file integrity check errors because there's no longer a user that is identified as being the person who took this note, but they're no longer in the system. So instead, you simply unmark them as a login user, and you can also inactivate them. So typically, when someone is working at the firm, this is what it looks like. They are a login user, and they are not inactive. Typically, when they leave, you no longer want them to be able to log in, and you don't want them to show up on all the lists where you're listing users when you're selecting users for calendar items or selecting users at any point within the program. So that inactive keeps them from showing up on those lists, and the login user not being checked keeps them from being able to log into the system. So, and in a minute, Mary Jo's going to talk about, I believe Mary Jo's going to talk about what happens when a user gets married or changes their name. There's another thing that you can do. You don't want to delete them. You don't necessarily want to inactivate them and uncheck their login user and create a whole new user. There's a way to get around that there. But for people that are gone, you simply uncheck login user and you check inactive, and then no longer can they log in, no longer can anybody else log in under that name, and no longer will they show up, and yet they will still be there for historical purposes. Now, a lot of times people say, well, I only have 14 users in PracticeMaster. I only paid for 14 users. and I don't want it to lock somebody out, it's not going to. The number of users that you've purchased in PracticeMaster are what we call concurrent users. That means that's how many people can be in the system at a time. Now, if you have 14 people in your firm, you can pretty much assure, and you're using PracticeMaster. Some firms pretend to use it and don't really do much with it. But if you're using PracticeMaster and you have 14 users in your firm, you can pretty much be sure that those 14 people are going to be in there all day long. If somebody leaves and is replaced by somebody else, well, then somebody that leaves isn't going to be logging in. You could have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of users set up in your system. That doesn't matter. You are not, by having these extra users, you're not wasting any licenses or paying any extra money over and above what you're doing. So that's that. Then the other thing that I want to make sure that you understand here is that there's this thing here called Reset Profile that when you're active you can do, that will basically reset all the default settings tied to this user. Now, if you ask, what does that mean, we can simply go into Help and look at Reset Profile, and they have in here a list of all the things that get reset in Tabs, Accounts Payable, General Ledger, Trust Accounting, and PracticeMaster. For instance, the last Detail Rapid Entry Mode for transactions. What was the last thing that you used in Tabs? What was the last view status for certain data entry windows? What are your text macro auto expand statuses? In other words, when you type a text macro, does it automatically turn it into words within the descriptions that you're typing within fees? Resetting one thing will reset them all. For instance, if you say, oh, I told it not to show a certain option that I really do want it to remind me. You know, you've seen it before. Are you sure you want to delete this task? Or are you sure you want to mark this task as complete? And then there's a little box that says, if you check this, it won't show this message anymore. Well, maybe you check that, and now you think, oh, gosh, I really do want it to remind me that I am about to mark a task complete. If you reset the profile, you will make it so that that box pops up again. But you will also be resetting every other default back to the original out-of-the-box setting. So it's kind of an all-or-nothing thing, but can be helpful if you've gotten to a situation where you need to just get back to wherever that user was when they started, when they were first configured. So that's that. I'm going to turn it over now to Mary Jo. She's going to talk about groups.
Okay, the next item up here, obviously, is our groups. I'm going to go ahead and close this box. The groups button looks just like the user ID box, but it's like a group of user IDs. And you're going to use this for PracticeMaster calendar purposes. What you can do here is you can take a list here, and like right here you can see it's got Anderson's staff. So maybe Mr. Anderson and his legal assistants and secretary, he wants those all, every time he makes a calendar entry in PracticeMaster, he wants to just have all of those people included on that calendar entry. So you can define different groups for different groups of people, whether it's the group of attorneys or your court attorneys or your trial attorneys or you know, just legal staff or all staff or things like that. And it just saves you from when you're in PracticeMaster and you're creating a calendar entry, rather than have to go in and check off, you know, 6 different people or 3 different people every time, and it's always going to be these people that all the, you know, the entries have to go on all of their calendars. You can create groups in here to have little shortcuts. And then I can just tell it who I want to be included in that group. I can also come in here and I can change who is in this group, but it will not change past calendar entries that I've put in. So if I've already assigned, you know, trial dates for Mr. Anderson's staff, and I come in here and I need to add Pam to that group, I can add it and I can change it for Anderson's staff, and all of my entries in the future will include Pam. But if I want to put her on all of the entries I've already done, I will need to go in and manually put her in there. So just keep that in mind when you're changing groups. It won't undo past entries, but it will go ahead and do that from this, you know, this point forward. So you can create as many different kinds of groups as you want. And Paul's going to tell you one other thing that you can do here about with groups that don't involve people.
I call them the non-people the non-people users. It's not actually done here in groups. It's done over here in users. But it's like groups. Groups is a way to say we have a meeting for all the estate planning attorneys, or we have a meeting for all the staff or all the lawyers, and being able to simply say staff or lawyers. There's other things that you sometimes want to include in meetings that aren't users, and those are, for example, conference rooms, or projectors, or screens, or other assets that you have that are limited. You only have 4 conference rooms. Each one has a name or some sort of an identifier. If you create users for those conference rooms, and I'll just go ahead and create a new one.
You have one in there, Paul.
I do.
Conference room.
There we go, conference room 1. We can then, and we want to set them up as non-login users who are not inactive. That means they'll show up to be scheduled, but you can't log into the system as conference room 1 or CR1 as I've got it here. And that way, when the time comes, if I want to schedule a conference with myself and Mary Jo in conference room 1 with the projector at 1 o'clock, it sounds like Clue, in the green room with the candlestick, at 1 o'clock on Monday, if I select those 2 people plus that conference room plus that projector, and they are being used, or the projector or the conference room are being used by somebody else, it's going to tell me. It's going to tell me I've got a conflict for the conference room. It's not available from 2 to 3, it's available from 1 to 2, or that the projector is being used at that point. So it's nice to be able to schedule things as well as people in certain instances. And the best examples I have of this, conference rooms, projectors, screens, but I've seen a lot of creative uses for these things. Extra laptops, floating laptops, all sorts of different things I've seen set up in firms. It's just a nifty way to schedule things. Okay, Mary Jo's going to talk now about firm info.
Okay, the last icon that we're going to talk about here is the little scales, and that is where you put all of your firm information. Most of the time when you first get the software, you come in here and you set this up, and this is what will be printed on the heading for all of your reports. So this is what you want to put in there, is the actual name of your firm, the address, spell out your state, your county, put your federal ID number in, your phone, and your fax. When you first purchase the software, you get a little postcard that you send back to STI in Nebraska, and they go ahead and they put your information on file so that you're registered. Let's say that you move to a different suite, you change your phone number, you change the name of the firm. You know, somebody leaves, somebody new comes in, you reestablish, you get a new firm ID. You still have the software, it's still good, you just have to transfer the name. This is where you would do that. So you can come in here and change the name of the firm, reprint your correct federal ID on here, and whenever you make a change to the system, and I'll just go ahead and I will change the number here. And I save this, a screen is going to pop up that tells you that a change has been detected, and when you say OK, it pops up a firm change form here. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to print this off, and you're going to want to mail this to STI in Lincoln, Nebraska, so that they can make that change in their files. That way they have the most current information for your registration. So if you ever have any problems or anything or issues with maintenance, you can come in here and they'll have the correct information when you get there. Here you can also, it'll ask you, have partners been added or removed. You can say they've been added, you can say they've been removed, or maybe it's neither. Maybe you're just changing the name, or for whatever reason you moved or whatever. You don't need to check anything, but you can if you have added partners or removed them. Print the form, mail it off, they'll update that information for you, and you're all set. Paul?
I will say that all of the people that are here today filled out cards and sent them in, but I'm happy to say that STI doesn't do that anymore. They now register their products with a single online registration. So I don't think I see anybody here that's in this situation, but if you're a new user, well, David may be, you don't register by filling out the cards anymore. You actually go into help, and I don't even know if it's on this system, and there is an ability now to register your software online, which I think is really cool, totally unrelated, but really cool. I'm going to talk about certain reports that you have, and they're pretty simple. I'm going to simply point out that you can create a list of access profiles and a user list and a group list. Not a big deal. Access profile list is kind of nice to have simply because it shows all the different levels of access for the different software packages, at least who's in what packages. And I think we even have an option. include a detail option that goes into, well, okay, I lied. Oh, no, that's, one more time we're going to try this. Nope, okay. It doesn't give all the detail.
You have to choose the software pack over here.
Detail, tabs. Thank you. This is why we keep Mary Jo around. One of the many, many reasons. There we go. I knew this was in here somewhere. And it shows exactly which level of detail you have for each individual area of the program. So very, very helpful to make sure your access profiles are mapped out the right way. And of course, you also have the ability to print user lists and group lists. Not quite as exciting as the access profile list, but nice to have. Nice to be able to go in and maintain those reports and use them to make sure everything's set up properly. Okay, Mary Jo?
Okay. The last thing that we're going to talk about is our utilities. So when we come in here for the utilities, Paul talked a little bit about when you have a user leave the firm and how to go ahead and make them inactive and uncheck the box for login so that they're no longer a logon user. There's a couple of other things that you can do here in utilities. First off, the reindex files, real quick. If you get fatal errors and sometimes it wants you to reset an ST user file or something like that, you might have to reindex or do something in the ST user. It's over here in system config. Sometimes people will go into tabs, they'll go into PracticeMaster, and they can't find that specific ST user file. That's because it's over here. So you can reindex files here in system configuration. We've got a couple of things here that you can do. You can rename a user and you can reassign a user. And people get these confused, so I'm going to go through what that actually means. Paul had talked about when you have a user that gets married or they change their name for whatever reason. They're not leaving the firm, but they're just changing their name. You can come in and you can rename the user. And everybody does need to be logged out of the system for you to do this, but you can come in and you can go ahead and rename the user. You can make your backup first. You put in the old user ID name, so you can choose, whatever their name was before and give them a new user ID. So you can rename that ID to give them a different initial or whatever, and then you can go in once you've changed your ID, and then you can change their actual last name and things like that on there. So then, if Cheryl L becomes Cheryl H, you could come in here and you could change, or I'm sorry, Cheryl B, I guess she is, and she becomes something else. You can come in here and you can change her initials or whatever it is for her ID. And then you can go into the user, change her last name and things like that. And then everything on her journal entries, her calendar, any of those things will show up as her new name. Now, the other thing that we have here is the reassign the user. Let's say that Cheryl leaves the firm and Jody takes her place. I can come in here and create a user for Jody, and then I can come in and I can say that all entries that were prior assigned to Cheryl are now going to be Jody's cases. She's going to have to review those calendar entries or those journal entries or things like that. So I can reassign any entry that was associated with Cheryl, and I can assign those now to Jody. So I would just go ahead and put the old user ID and then the new user ID. It's going to go through, and it's going to go through any journal entry that has that, and it's going to reassign them to the new user. Once I've done that, there won't be anything left underneath Cheryl, so then I could safely delete her from the user list. Like Paul said, you don't want to just go in there and start deleting users. If you just want to real quick get it so that they can't access, you uncheck the logon box and you make them inactive. Then maybe you want to reassign those entries to a new user. You can do that, and then you can safely delete her or him. So that's how you actually get rid of a user. Some people, they have a real long list of users and they just want to clean those up. That's the procedure to do that. The change, I'm going to close this. The change data ID is actually just something that you're going to use. STI will use that. They may need to come in here and actually make some changes through their tech support program or something to walk you through getting in there and doing that. So that's not something that you would be using just to come in and start playing around with. It's not even available to you to use. So you can just ignore that one. And that's all I have. Do we have any questions, Paul?
We have one clarification from Dick, our power user, Dick Luff. We'll give you credit for this one, Dick. And I always get this backwards, too. The calendar rights, you're not assigning, what did we say? We're not assigning who this person can access here. We're assigning who can access this person. In other words, if I check that Kathy can browse private, I'm saying that she can browse Paul Perdue's private, not that Paul Perdue can browse her private entries. I always get this backwards. Dick must have been in here recently doing this because he's corrected us. It's the way that Mary Jo explained it is backwards, and I didn't even say anything because I always go into help to look when I'm faced with this assigning. But what you're doing is you're saying that Kathleen has access to browse the private entries of Paul Perdue, not that Paul Perdue has access to browse the private entries of Kathleen. It was backwards the way we said it, so be careful. What I recommend, because I always get it wrong, is that if you're going to mess with these and you don't have a basis, if you're doing it for the first time, once you've done it, you can go and see how other people are set up and realize how you've set it up. But if you don't have that basis, try one change to one person for one other person. In other words, make a couple checks for just one person as it relates to the other, and then make sure you've got it the right way. Go out and try to create an entry or browse an entry, and then go on with setting your calendar rights. And I think that's it. Anybody else ask anything, Mary Jo?
Nope, that's it. Any other questions?
Lawyer jokes? Anything? Okay. Well, that is it. What were we talking about today that would be our, oh yes, writing manual checks. We were talking today about one of our subjects for the next virtual user group meeting, so we happen to know that probably the next virtual user group in August will cover, among other things, processing manual or electronic entries within accounts payable. Don't know what the other item will be, but as you know, you get an announcement the Thursday before the virtual user group meeting, so keep your eyes peeled for that announcement on Thursday before the last Tuesday of the month. That's hard to say, hard to comprehend. Telling you what the topics will be, and if there's something that interests you, sign up and we'll look for you there. But other than that, everybody have a good day, and we will talk to you next month. Bye-bye.